Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. For many years, Canadians have turned to live-in caregivers to provide care for their children and their seniors. As the affordability and accessibility to childcare and home care for aging seniors has become increasingly difficult to obtain, and the demand for childcare is unaffordable, the demand for live-in caregiver program has increased. I don't think anyone questions the fact that there is a clear long-term demonstrated labour shortage in this area. The previous Conservative government acknowledged that the program was broken and that the live-in caregivers are in a very vulnerable position, prone to abuse and exploitation. Their supposed fixes to the problems in the program were entirely deficient and missed the central point, and that is, if you're good enough to work, you're good enough to stay. Currently, live-in caregivers must work for 2 years in Canada before they could even apply for permanent residence. This leaves them in a vulnerable position, as individuals could be placed in a position where they're being exploited, but would not come forward out of fear that they will lose their opportunity to apply for permanent residence and ultimately gain access to Canada and to become a citizen. Not only is this a major problem, while the Conservatives did do away with the live-in component, they added other onerous barriers to the pathway for permanency for the caregivers program. The caregivers, to be eligible to apply for permanent residence, they need to have Canadian post-secondary education credentials of at least 1 year or an equivalent foreign credential supported by an educational credential assessment. And to top it off, even if they meet that requirement, there's now a backlog of almost 60,000 applications and increasingly longer processing times for the care workers to gain permanent residence in Canada and to be reunited with their families. In fact, the average wait times of families is 4.5 years. The processing time is taking so long that for many families, their medical, their criminal, and security checks have expired. And by the way, each medical costs an extra $200 for each individual. It is a huge financial burden. Immigration lawyer Lobat Satarhashimi highlighted the injustices caregivers face when compared to other immigration streams at the Citizenship Committee. She stated, and I quote, "Even if you look at other programs, such as the Canadian Experience Class, which does require 1 year of work, so it's very similar, you'll see that their applications for permanent residence are processed in 6 months. That's the average processing time. Because they are allowed to bring their spouses on accompanied work permits, they're not separated from their families, whereas live-in caregivers are separated from their families while they're doing their work requirement. And then on top of that, their processing takes 8 times longer, and during that time, they are not with their families," end quote. With such long delays in processing, for some families, their children have aged out and will not be included in the application as they renew the process. So as a result of this, lots of families are breaking down. Children have suffered such long separation from their mothers that they struggle to reconnect with her, and in effect, their mothers is a stranger to them. I asked the government to put this to themselves. What would they do, and how would they find this acceptable if it was their own family in that situation? For caregivers, it's a minimum of 6 years of separation. I hope the government will be in agreement on this point. This is frankly inhumane, and we need to fix the problem.